we continue, I'm addressing the prosecution both in the opening statement and yesterday. The prosecution has drawn our attention to a false report, at least claimed to be false, about the use of phosphoric bombs and gravel. Now that seems to be a factual matter which is strongly opposed by the defense. The chamber would be assisted if the prosecution could point to the evidence that it was a false report, which I take it will be based on evidence that no phosphoric shells were used in the attack on Bravo. If that's somewhere during these days, if you could clarify that. I may have it in the briefs, but that specific issue.
I'll address the issue, Your Honor.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Kihu, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Mr. President. Just continuing on and completing this allegations levied by the prosecution concerning the artillery attack. We know in an examination of Kenin there was virtually no damage to civilian structures. And we know that in their allegations concerning Bankovac, Obrovac, and Grachac, they have presented no evidence of civilian injuries or deaths. Question. This horrific attack allegedly put forth by the HV on the 4th, certainly it caused significant civilian deaths and injuries in Kenin. Well, an examination of the evidence once again reflects that that is not the case. They have evidence of some people seeing some individuals in a hospital without a determination as to how those people were killed. But they give us in footnote 1959 the identification of several people they maintain were killed during this attack, briefly referring through this group, and I refer to clarification schedule 185 through 190, number 205 and 25. When we look at that evidence, the number is narrowed down still further. Number 2, victim 225, testified by Ms. Grubor, who saw this person on the 5th coming into the hospital in Kenin. No idea where this person was killed, was hurt. No idea if it was in military targets. No idea if it was in a combat area. None whatsoever. Yet they offer that as part of their unlawful attack against the civilian population charge. How about the 6 individuals named in 185 through 190? These are the individuals that were allegedly killed outside the UN barracks on the morning of the 5th of August. What they don't tell you is that at least one of those people was dead already. Nevertheless, he's included in this victim of illegal attack on the civilian population by artillery MRLs. However, under the best of circumstances, these individuals were killed in a mortar attack. Had nothing to do with long-range artillery, had nothing to do with MRLs. Furthermore, the evidence reflects, as detailed in our brief at paragraph 997, that the people involved didn't know whether or not these people were killed by the ARSK or that mortar was shot by the HV. If you recall, the evidence in the record was likewise that prior to that, the ARSK did, in fact, target the UN Sector South headquarters. Sorry. My apologies, Mr. President. They did, prior to that time, the ARSK did target the UN Sector South headquarters with mortar fire. So, after all is said and done, with the autopsies, investigations, and years of analysis by the Office of the Prosecutor, we're able to arguably establish one civilian, 205, one civilian possibly killed by artillery fire in Operation Storm. Despite this dearth and paucity of evidence, the prosecution claims that the artillery incident is a criminal act, an unlawful attack against a civilian population for which General Gotovine is culpable. It's simply not borne out by any of the facts in the record. Frankly, the prosecution employs the same tactic in many other instances, in which they engage in speculation or possible illicit inferences which could be drawn from their selection of evidence rather than meeting their burden of proof, which is to demonstrate that their conclusions are the only reasonable conclusions which could be drawn from the totality of the evidence. They ask for the guilt of General Gotovine while offering this chamber the evidence concerning the death of one individual, and even that, they don't lay out the factual circumstances of that death. Another example of how this tactic is employed by the prosecution has to do with psyops. The prosecution claims in paragraph 502 of their brief that P-478 is an order by General Gotovine to drop flyers. However, the prosecution's in-house expert, Mr. Tunins, makes clear that P-478 was not, I emphasize, was not used during Operation Storm, notwithstanding what the prosecution says in their brief. We refer the chamber to Mr. Tunins' report, P-1113, P-1113, page 371, footnote 457. Mr. Tunins agreed that General Gotovine's actual order, used during Storm in D-201, makes no mention of flyers. As outlined in our brief, and we shan't go into it at this juncture, at 320, paragraphs 320, 329, the use of psyops was not the cause of the civilian evacuation or the fleeing of the area. These individuals left simply because of two reasons. They were encircled, or going to be encircled, as told by General Merksich, and as the Sturbots told us, or verified in a tape very strongly, that they left because they didn't want to stay on a Croatian rule, and they needed to, quote, observe their biological potential, and that's a D-926. Notwithstanding the lack of evidence concerning flyers, Mr. Russo yesterday argued that there is, in fact, proof this flyer that in evidence was, in fact, dropped. Really. Let us look at paragraphs 325 or 326 of the Gotovine prosecution brief. Only evidence presented of a flyer being dropped was a flyer that was dropped in Bosnia. To try to counter this, Mr. Russo directs our attention to the testimony of Maria Chermaka. He did that yesterday, page 33, line 1 to 5. What the prosecution didn't tell you yesterday was that Miss Chermaka never identified the flyer that was presented to her. And I point the chamber to P-652, paragraph 10, P-653, paragraph 5. More importantly, Miss Chermaka never testified that she and her family left the area because of the flyer. Instead, she testified she left at the instruction of her son, who told her he had heard over the radio that Kinede had fallen, and that's why they left. This can be found at trial transcript 6,727, line 24 to 25, and 6,725, line 19 through 6,726, line 7. The prosecution at no point has proven that Serb civilians left because of any unlawful use of either psyops or artillery. In the interest of time, Mr. President, I'd like to move to the other factor alleged in by the prosecution in paragraph 21, which is the alleged acceptance by General Gotovine of crimes as justified acts of violence. The only thing
before you continue, could you clarify your reference to the paragraphs 325 and 326 of the you said Gotovine's prosecution's brief?
It's on a line. It is our final brief, paragraphs 325 and 326 in our brief. I apologize.
In your brief.
In our brief. My apologies. My apologies.
Please proceed.
I would like to turn our attention to this allegation of our client's alleged acceptance of crime. Nothing could be further from the truth. In the few instances where this conversation came up, what did General Gotovine say? General Gotovine was discussed this matter with the ECMM as reflected in our brief. And the ECMM monitor who was present during this discussion understood several matters. That the police, civilian police, had control of the situation, and that any person committing crimes should be charged. And then he took away from that remark that General Gotovine wanted anyone, regardless of whether he was a soldier or a civilian, who was engaged in criminal behavior to be charged with a crime. Remarkably, that is never discussed in the OTP's brief. However, I refer back to Mr. Golovich. That is exactly what Mr. Golovich did when he came in and testified over the course of the many months where over 1,200 charges were filed on the wake of Operation Storm. As I mentioned at the outset, an item that is conveniently, or whatever reason it had to be, left out of the prosecution's brief. We need not go into that significantly more than we have, and I refer the Chamber to paragraphs 593 to 599 of our brief to talk about General Gotovine's actions in the face of crime. But fundamentally, we challenge this statement and of Mr. Hederali and the premise of the prosecution, where Mr. Hederali said yesterday most of these crimes were committed by soldiers or by civilians in concert with soldiers. Now, I understand that Your Honor has given us a chart that deals with restrictions of movement in page 148 of the prosecution's brief, and we'll discuss that. But prior to that, we need to discuss the fundamental flaw in the entire analysis by the prosecution. That is the attempt to designate all of these perpetrators, or most of these perpetrators, as members of the HV. And how they do that? They do that by throwing the evidence of crimes that have taken place in the Kraina, in Sector South, and we did not debate at one point that crimes actually took place, and then putting it together with units that were located in the area at some time, and a fortiori, because this took place, and units may have been in the area at some point, a fortiori, they were responsible for that crime without ever identifying who the individual perpetrators were. And based on that, they're asking the Chamber to convict the accused. They're simply not anywhere near meeting their burden of proof. This underlying logical flaw was exemplified by all during the testimony of prosecution witness William Hayden, when his conclusory statements and opinions elicited by the prosecution were explored by the defense counsel and the Chambers on cross. And I refer to Mr. Hayden's testimony at page 10,628, line 15, 10,645, line 7. And without going into this in toto, Mr. President, Your Honors, I'd like to summarize some of that. Mr. Hayden was drawing conclusions about systematic, organized looting and burning by the HV, which upon examination were without foundation. Although